Well, the lesson from the Bangkok conference being held at the end of February 2015 is that things are not all that good in Asia, actually. There is a lot of violence, there's a lot of discrimination, the laws are really dragging behind. The discriminatory laws, often introduced by colonial regimes, but retained in countries of Asia, are still coming down very hard on LGBTIQ people in Asia. And many of the stories here in Bangkok have related to transgender people and the special violence and the special animosity and hatred that has been visited on them. So there's a lot of work to be done, and that work means work from government, but it also means work from civil society, reaching out to LGBT people and incorporating them in the efforts so as to get change. I think there's a big opportunity to bring equality, justice and a little bit of kindliness to fellow human beings in the Asia-Pacific region. Lawyers generally have a big role to play in helping communities to catch up with more human rights respecting law, questioning old laws and old policies and attitudes in schools and in society, and using law as a tool to improve the community's understanding of the LGBTI communities in our midst. I think lawyers have a special role to play because the plain fact of the matter is, particularly in the Asia-Pacific region, that a lot of the laws that serve to oppress people are laws that lawyers have to play a part in implementing. Usually criminal lawyers, usually in the criminal courts, but also in civil society, in commercial settings, in banks, in insurance companies. The law needs to be reassessed and revalued, and that's where lawyers come in. Lawyers have a role to play in this, and lawyers as leaders in their society and as people who have an obligation to be aware of constitutionalism, principles of justice and principles of human rights, have a role to bring a greater focus of the law, and that, I think, is going to be a challenge for the decades ahead. Well, the private sector has a specific role in these issues because the latest research that's been conducted by the World Bank shows that something of the order of $1.3 billion US dollars a year is lost to the economy of India because of the fact that the laws of India, particularly Section 377 of the Criminal Penal Code of India, stigmatise and discriminate against LGBT people and put them down. And if you do that, then you're losing the economic component of a very large section of the community, probably about 5% at least, probably something more than that. And therefore, unless we are to exclude these people from our economies and not to involve them fully in the economies of our societies, there's a role for lawyers and management and chief executives particularly to bring people into full participation in the workforce and in society. It sometimes is explained in terms of people bringing their whole selves to their job, not pretending to be something other than they are, being honest to themselves, to their fellow workers, and also bringing their economic value to their jobs. Banks, for example, have begun to realise in the Asian area that the LGBT cohort of the population is an important economic cohort. These are people who are buying homes, involving themselves in education, involving themselves in businesses, and unless you appeal to the cohort, unless you reach out to them and involve them, then you are losing a market. That's the plain fact of the matter. And I think it's the realisation that these are markets to be lost that are beginning to percolate through to the business community. When I was Special Representative of the Secretary-General of the United Nations for Human Rights in Cambodia, and I tried to explain why HIV/AIDS was a human rights issue, I got nowhere. But when I began to explain that if you deny people the protection of their human right to health and to life, that would have a big economic cost on the Cambodian economy and community, that's when the politicians and the business leaders began to pay attention. And I think it's the same about discrimination and disadvantage for gay people, LGBT people in Asia. It's when people understand that this is an important economic cohort that they begin to pay attention. And I believe that message is getting through now. Slowly, but we all know Asian people are pretty canny, and the Asian economies are pretty advanced. The legal system is not advanced in this area, and there's a job to be done as the economy reaches out to and includes an important cohort of the community. When I was a judge in Australia for 34 years, rising to the highest court in the country, the High Court of Australia, I learned that the best human rights lawyers were actually lawyers who'd had a good training in commercial law, because they weren't just speaking from the heart. They knew how to do the law. Human rights law and human rights cases and disadvantage and discrimination are legal problems. And good training in commercial law is a way to prepare you to argue better in the human rights field. And we in Australia have learned with our pro bono contingent and the work of pro bono in big firms, big commercial legal firms, we found that that is what keeps the young lawyers interested and committed. If you ask, why does a person go into law in the first place? Some people go in just to make a lot of money, but others go in and they hope to make a good income, but they go in with a sense of justice rummaging around in their head. They are people who have been attracted to the notion that society should be organised. There should be an answer to problems, and it should be a just answer to problems. And it's giving young lawyers an opportunity to do this work that keeps them committed to the law. And it's not inconsistent with being a good commercial lawyer. In fact, as I say, I think the best human rights lawyers are lawyers who've been trained in bills of lading and contract problems and statutory interpretation, and that's the business of the big commercial firms.